Steve Harvey had been standing on stages for over 40 years. From comedy clubs in Cleveland where the audiences numbered in the dozens to sold-out arenas across the nation, he had seen just about everything the entertainment world could throw at him. He had hosted beauty pageants, game shows, talk shows, and comedy specials. He had interviewed celebrities, helped families win money, and delivered advice to millions. But on this particular Thursday afternoon in September 2024, as he stood backstage at the Family Feud studio preparing for what he assumed would be another standard taping, Steve Harvey had no idea that his past was about to walk through that door and change everything he thought he knew about gratitude, impact, and the power of one small act of kindness. The studio audience was settling into their seats. The familiar theme music was ready to play. Two families stood nervously in the wings, practicing their responses and trying to remember everything they had rehearsed about playing the game. The production crew moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals who had done this hundreds of times before. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Everything seemed like just another day at work. But sometimes the most extraordinary moments arrive disguised as ordinary ones, and this was about to become one of those moments that would remind everyone watching that we never truly know how our actions ripple out into the world and come back to us in ways we could never predict. If you appreciate stories about the unexpected ways our past catches up with us and the beautiful surprises that come from simple acts of kindness, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible true stories that remind us what really matters in life. Steve walked onto the stage with his characteristic energy and warmth. The audience applauded enthusiastically as he greeted them with his signature smile and launched into his opening remarks. He introduced the first family, the Johnsons from Atlanta, and then turned to introduce the second family. But as he read the name on his card, something in his mind stirred. The Martinez family from Houston, Texas. The name was common enough, but when the family walked out onto the stage, Steve's eyes locked onto one particular person, and for just a moment, the host, who was never at a loss for words, found himself completely speechless. The man standing in the center of the Martinez family was probably in his early 50s. He had salt and pepper hair, kind eyes, and a dignified bearing that suggested someone who had worked hard for everything he had achieved in life. He wore a simple but well-pressed suit, and he stood with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove but everything to be grateful for. When his eyes met Steve's, there was a flicker of recognition, a moment of connection that seemed to transcend the bright lights and cameras and audience and bring both men back to a different time and place altogether. Steve recovered quickly, professional to his core, and continued with the show introduction. But throughout the first few rounds of the game, he kept glancing at this man, trying to place him, trying to remember where and when their paths had crossed. The feeling was familiar but frustratingly elusive, like trying to remember a dream that fades the moment you wake up. The Martinez family played well, laughing and supporting each other through correct answers and wrong guesses alike. They had the kind of genuine family chemistry that made for good television, the kind of warmth and connection that audiences loved to see. By the time they reached the fast money round, the Martinez family had won the main game. The man who had caught Steve's attention, whose name was revealed to be Robert Martinez, would be playing the second round of fast money. His daughter had gone first and scored a respectable 137 points, which meant Robert needed 63 points to win the $20,000 for his family. It was an achievable target, but there was always pressure in that moment when everything depended on your answers. As Robert stepped up to the podium, Steve approached him with the microphone. This was the moment for the usual banter, the encouragement and light teasing that Steve was famous for delivering before the fast money questions began. But instead of his typical routine, Steve paused. He looked at Robert more carefully, and something in his expression must have conveyed his confusion because Robert smiled gently and said words that would stop everything in its tracks. "Mr. Harvey, before we start, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you why I asked my family to apply for this show, and why it means so much to me to be standing here with you right now." The audience grew quiet, sensing that something unusual was happening. Steve, microphone in hand, nodded for Robert to continue. This was not standard procedure, and the producers in the control room were probably having minor heart attacks about the disruption to the show's timing. But Steve Harvey had learned long ago to trust his instincts about these moments. Sometimes the best television happened when you threw out the script and let real human connection take over. Robert took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion that had clearly been building for decades. "Mr. Harvey, we met once before, 32 years ago in Cleveland, Ohio. You would not remember me, and there is absolutely no reason why you should. But I have never forgotten you, and I have never forgotten what you did for me on one of the worst nights of my life." Steve's brow furrowed as he tried to place the memory. Cleveland, 32 years ago. That would have been 1992, early in his career, back when he was still grinding it out on the comedy circuit, performing at small clubs and bars, working multiple shows a night just to make enough money to keep going. Those were the hungry years, the years before the big break, before the success and fame, when every night was a battle to prove himself and every paycheck mattered desperately. It was December 15th, 1992. Robert continued, his voice growing stronger as he told his story. "I was 21 years old, and I had just moved to Cleveland from Houston, trying to make a fresh start. I had dropped out of college, I was working as a dishwasher at a restaurant downtown, and I was living in a tiny apartment that barely had heat. My father had passed away 3 months earlier, and I was completely alone in a city where I did not know anyone. I was depressed, broke, and honestly questioning whether life was worth continuing." The studio had gone completely silent. This was not the usual Family Feud content. This was something raw and real, and everyone present could feel it. Steve's expression had shifted from confusion to deep attention. He lowered the microphone slightly, no longer the host but simply a man listening to another man's story. "That night, December 15th, I decided I was going to end my life," Robert said quietly. "I had a plan. I was going to finish my shift at the restaurant, go back to my apartment, and that was going to be it. But my coworker, this older guy named James who had been kind to me, somehow sensed something was wrong. He insisted I come with him after work. He said there was a comedy show at this little club a few blocks away, and he had 2 free tickets because his brother worked security there. I did not want to go. I had no interest in laughing or being around people. But James would not take no for an answer. He basically dragged me to that club." Steve's eyes were glistening now. He could feel where this story was going, and the weight of it was settling over him like a heavy blanket. "You were performing that night, Mr. Harvey," Robert continued. "You were one of 3 comedians on the bill. I remember you came out on that tiny stage in your suit, and you started talking about your own struggles. You talked about being homeless, about living in your car, about the times when you had no idea where your next meal was coming from. You talked about the people who had told you to give up on your dreams and get a real job. You talked about the nights when you questioned everything and wondered if you were crazy for keep trying." Robert's voice cracked slightly, but he pushed forward. "And then you said something that I have carried with me every single day for the past 32 years. You said, the moment right before you are about to break through is always the moment when it feels the darkest. That is when most people quit. But if you can just hold on through one more night, one more rejection, one more failure, you might wake up and find that everything has changed. You said that sometimes we are put through the fire not to destroy us, but to burn away everything that is not truly us, so we can become who we were always meant to be." Tears were running down Robert's face now, and he made no attempt to hide them. "I went back to my apartment that night, and I did not follow through with my plan. I decided to hold on for one more night, and then one more night after that, and then another. Your words, Mr. Harvey, your willingness to share your own pain and struggle on that stage in front of strangers, that saved my life. I am not being dramatic. I am telling you the literal truth. You saved my life that night, and you had absolutely no idea." The audience was openly crying now. Camera operators were wiping their eyes. Even the hardened production staff, who had seen countless emotional moments on television sets, were visibly moved. But no one was more affected than Steve Harvey himself. The man who could always find the right words, who could turn any situation into either a laugh or a lesson, stood there with tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. Robert continued through his own tears. "I kept that ticket stub from that night. I carried it in my wallet for years until it literally fell apart. I went back to school and finished my degree. I became a counselor specializing in suicide prevention and mental health. Over the past 30 years, I have worked with thousands of young people who were standing where I was standing that night. Every single time I sit with someone who is in that dark place, I tell them what you told me. Hold on for one more night. The breakthrough might be right around the corner." He paused to collect himself before continuing. "I got married to an amazing woman named Maria. We have 3 beautiful children. I have a career that I love. I have a life that I never thought I would get to experience. And every bit of it, every single moment of joy and love and purpose, exists because you stood on a stage 32 years ago and chose to be vulnerable and real instead of just funny. You chose to share your pain in a way that gave hope to a complete stranger who was sitting in the back of a comedy club planning to end his life that very night." Steve finally found his voice, though it was thick with emotion. "Robert, I do not even know what to say, man. I performed at so many small clubs back then. I was just trying to make people laugh so I could pay my rent. I had no idea that anything I said could have that kind of impact on someone's life." Robert smiled through his tears. "That is exactly my point, Mr. Harvey. We never know. We never know who is listening. We never know whose life we might change just by being honest about our own struggles. You were just doing your job, just being yourself, and you ended up saving a life. How many other lives have you touched without even knowing it? How many other people are out there who never got the chance to stand on a stage with you and say thank you?" Steve pulled Robert into a tight embrace, and the 2 men stood there holding each other while the audience gave them a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls of the studio. When they finally pulled apart, Steve wiped his eyes and addressed the cameras directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we do what we do. This is why I show up every day and try to bring some light and laughter into the world. You never know who needs to hear what you have to say. You never know whose life you might change just by being real about your own journey." He turned back to Robert. "Brother, you did not need to win any money today. You already gave me a gift that is worth more than anything we could give you on this show. But we are still going to play fast money, and I have a feeling you are going to do just fine." The audience laughed through their tears as the show resumed. Robert answered his 5 questions with a calm confidence that seemed to come from a place deeper than just knowing game show trivia. When the answers were revealed, he had scored 87 points, bringing the family total to 224 and easily winning the $20,000. But everyone in that studio knew that the real prize had already been given and received. The money was just a bonus compared to the exchange of gratitude and recognition that had taken place. After the taping concluded, Steve asked Robert and his family to stay. Once the audience had filed out and the cameras had stopped rolling, Steve sat down with Robert in the now quiet studio and asked him to tell the whole story. Robert shared details about that dark period of his life, about the depression that had consumed him after his father's death, about the isolation and hopelessness that had led him to that desperate decision. He talked about how James, the co-worker who had insisted he attend the comedy show, had later become a close friend and eventually the best man at his wedding. He explained how that one night had set him on a completely different path, how he had dedicated his life to being for others what Steve had unknowingly been for him. Steve listened with the full attention of someone receiving a sacred gift. When Robert finished, Steve shared something he had never spoken about publicly before. He talked about his own dark nights during those early years of his career. He revealed that there had been times when he had seriously considered giving up, times when the struggle had seemed too hard and the dream too far away. He admitted that he had fought his own battles with depression and doubt, and that on some of those nights when he performed, he was speaking as much to himself as to the audience. He was reminding himself of the reasons to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. "I think that is why your story means so much to me," Steve said quietly, "because I know what it is like to be in that place where you are questioning everything. And to find out that on one of those nights when I was barely holding on myself, my words helped someone else hold on too, that feels like proof that even our darkest struggles can serve a purpose. Even our pain can become someone else's hope." The conversation continued for over an hour. Robert shared updates about his work in suicide prevention and mental health counseling. He told Steve about the hotline he had helped establish in Houston that had fielded thousands of calls from people in crisis. He talked about the support groups he facilitated for people dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts. He described the school programs he had developed to teach young people about mental health and give them tools to help their friends who might be struggling. Steve was amazed by the scope of Robert's work and impact. "So you are telling me that because of one night in a comedy club in Cleveland, you have gone on to save hundreds or maybe thousands of other lives?" Robert nodded. "That is what I am telling you. Your words created a ripple effect that is still spreading outward. Every person I have been able to help, they go on to help others. The impact multiplies. It never stops." In the weeks following that taping, Steve could not stop thinking about his encounter with Robert Martinez. The episode aired to massive ratings, and the clip of Robert's revelation went viral across social media platforms. Millions of people watched the moment when Robert shared his story, and the response was overwhelming. The comments sections filled with people sharing their own stories of struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. Many wrote about the words or actions of others that had helped them through their darkest times. Some shared that watching Robert's testimony had given them hope when they needed it most. Steve began receiving letters and messages from people all over the country who wanted to share similar stories. A woman from Oregon wrote about how seeing Steve on television during her own bout with depression had made her laugh for the first time in months and helped her realize she could feel joy again. A man from Florida explained that Steve's advice on his radio show had given him the courage to leave an abusive relationship and start over. A teacher from Michigan described how she showed Steve's motivational speeches to her students every year because his words about perseverance and faith had such a powerful impact on young people. Each story reinforced what Robert had tried to explain. We never truly know the full impact of our words and actions. We never see the complete picture of how our lives touch other lives. Someone could be sitting in an audience, watching a screen, listening to a radio, and hear exactly what they need to hear at exactly the right moment to change the trajectory of their entire life. And the person delivering those words might have no idea that anything significant had happened at all. Steve decided to use his platform to amplify this message. He invited Robert back on to his talk show to discuss mental health and suicide prevention in more depth. The episode featured experts in the field along with people who had survived their own suicide attempts and gone on to build meaningful lives. Robert spoke about the warning signs that someone might be struggling and the ways that ordinary people can help. He emphasized that you do not need to be a professional counselor to save a life. Sometimes all it takes is being willing to sit with someone in their pain, to refuse to let them face their darkness alone, to remind them that this feeling is temporary and help is available. The response to the episode was extraordinary. Mental health organizations reported a significant increase in calls to crisis hotlines in the days following the broadcast. Schools and community centers requested copies of the episode to use in their own mental health awareness programs. Steve's foundation partnered with Robert's organization to create a national initiative focused on suicide prevention and mental health support, particularly for young people and underserved communities. But perhaps the most profound impact was personal. Steve began approaching his work differently. He had always taken his platforms seriously, but now he carried an even deeper awareness of the responsibility that came with having a voice that reached millions. He thought more carefully about the messages he shared, the stories he told, the advice he gave. He made more time for conversations with audience members and fans who wanted to share their stories. He listened more intentionally to what people were telling him about their struggles and their hopes. 6 months after Robert's appearance on Family Feud, Steve hosted a special event in Houston, bringing together people whose lives had been touched by mental health challenges. Robert and his team helped organize the gathering, which combined education, support, and celebration. Hundreds of people attended, including suicide attempt survivors, family members who had lost loved ones, mental health professionals, and advocates working to break down the stigma around mental health issues. During the event, Steve took the stage and shared something that surprised even him. "Robert Martinez walked onto a game show set and changed my life," he said. "He reminded me that we are all connected in ways we cannot see. He reminded me that our struggles and our victories, our pain and our healing, they all matter. They all have meaning. They all create ripples that touch lives we will never meet." He continued, "I have been blessed with success and platforms that allow me to reach many people. But I want you to understand that you do not need a television show or a stage to make a difference in someone's life." The kind coworker who insisted that a depressed young man come to a comedy show instead of going home alone, that man saved a life just as much as anything I said on that stage. We all have power. We all have influence. We just have to be willing to use it with intention and care. The stories continued to pour in. A college student wrote about how Robert's testimony had inspired her to start a mental health awareness club on her campus. A father shared that watching the episode had given him the courage to seek help for his own depression instead of trying to handle it alone. A therapist explained that she now showed the clip to clients who felt hopeless, using it as an example that breakthrough moments can come from unexpected sources and that holding on through the darkness can lead to profound transformation. If these stories about the unexpected power of kindness and honest vulnerability resonate with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these important true stories that remind us all of our capacity to impact each other's lives in beautiful and unexpected ways. Robert and Steve developed a genuine friendship that extended far beyond that initial game show encounter. They stayed in regular contact, sharing updates about their work and their families. Steve became a vocal advocate for mental health awareness, using every platform available to him to encourage people to seek help when they needed it, and to be there for others who might be struggling. He partnered with mental health organizations to fund crisis intervention programs and support services in underserved communities. 3 years after Robert's appearance on Family Feud, Steve was honored at a major mental health advocacy gala. The award recognized his work in using his platform to reduce stigma around mental health issues and to promote access to care. Robert was there to present the award, and his speech brought the room to tears once again. 35 years ago, a comedian in Cleveland told me to hold on for one more night. Robert said, "Tonight, I stand before you representing thousands of people who are alive because they held on, because someone cared, because someone spoke truth about struggle and suffering, because someone chose vulnerability over pretending everything was fine. Steve Harvey saved my life without knowing it. But once he knew, he dedicated himself to saving countless others intentionally. That is the mark of true greatness. Not just the gifts we give accidentally, but what we do once we understand the power we carry." Steve's acceptance speech was characteristically humble. "I am standing here because Robert Martinez had the courage to tell his truth on national television. He could have just played fast money, taken his winnings, and gone home. But he chose to be vulnerable. He chose to share something deeply personal in front of millions of people. That took more courage than anything I have ever done. Robert, you are the real hero in this story. You turned your pain into purpose, and you have spent decades making sure that other people do not have to suffer alone the way you did." The impact of Robert's moment on Family Feud continued to ripple outward in ways that neither man could have fully anticipated. Universities began studying it as an example of how media could be used to promote important social causes. The clip became required viewing in some psychology and counseling programs as a powerful illustration of how sharing our stories can save lives. Mental health organizations used it in their training materials and public awareness campaigns. But beyond all the formal recognition and measurable impact, there were the countless individual moments that would never be captured or counted. The person who decided not to take their life after watching Robert's testimony. The parent who started really listening to their child's struggles instead of dismissing them. The friend who checked in on someone who seemed withdrawn and quiet. The teacher who noticed a student's pain and connected them with help. These moments happened in living rooms and classrooms and offices and cars all across the country and around the world. They happened because one man stood on a stage and said, "You saved my life, and you did not even know it." Years continued to pass, and the friendship between Steve and Robert deepened. They celebrated each other's milestones and supported each other through challenges. When Robert's organization opened a new crisis center in Houston, Steve was there for the ribbon cutting. When Steve's foundation launched a scholarship program for students pursuing careers in mental health, Robert helped develop the selection criteria. They appeared together at conferences and events, always emphasizing the same core message: your life matters, your struggles matter, your story matters. Hold on, get help, be the help someone else needs. On the 10th anniversary of Robert's appearance on Family Feud, the show did a special follow-up segment. They brought Robert and his family back to the studio, along with several people whose lives had been touched by his story. There was the teenager who had been planning her own suicide when she saw the original episode and decided to call a hotline instead. There was the military veteran who had struggled with PTSD and found hope in Robert's message about holding on through the darkness. There was the counselor who had been on the verge of burnout when watching the episode reminded her why her work mattered. Each person shared their story, and each story was another testament to the exponential impact of one moment of honest vulnerability. Steve listened to each testimony with the same rapt attention he had given Robert a decade earlier. When everyone had spoken, he stood and addressed the cameras with words that captured the essence of everything this journey had taught him. 10 years ago, a man walked onto this stage and told me that words I spoke in a comedy club in 1992 had saved his life. I had no memory of that night. I had no idea I had said anything that mattered. But Robert remembered. He held on to those words through 32 years of building a life and a career dedicated to helping others. And now, because he had the courage to share his story, we are sitting here with people who are alive today because of that ripple effect. This is the power we all carry. This is the responsibility and the opportunity that comes with being human. We affect each other. We matter to each other. Our words, our actions, our willingness to show up and be real, all of it matters more than we can possibly know. The story of Steve Harvey and Robert Martinez is not just about a moment on a game show. It is about the invisible threads that connect all of our lives. It is about the words spoken in darkness that become light for someone else. It is about the courage to share our pain and the grace to receive someone else's gratitude. It is about remembering that we never truly know the full impact of our presence in the world, but that should inspire us to move through life with greater intentional care and awareness. Robert Martinez went to Family Feud to say thank you to the man who had saved his life 3 decades earlier. In doing so, he created a moment that would save countless other lives. Steve Harvey showed up to host a game show and discovered that he had been part of a miracle he never knew about. Together, they reminded millions of people that holding on through one more night can lead to a lifetime of purpose, impact, and joy. They proved that our darkest struggles can become the foundation for our greatest contributions. They demonstrated that vulnerability is not weakness, but rather the bridge that allows us to truly connect with and help each other. As this story comes to its conclusion, both men continue their work. Steve keeps showing up on stages and screens, carrying the awareness that someone out there might desperately need to hear whatever he is about to say. Robert keeps counseling and teaching and advocating, forever grateful for the stranger who gave him a reason to live and forever committed to being that reason for others. And somewhere out there, right now, someone is holding on through their darkest night because they heard this story and decided to wait and see what tomorrow might bring. That is the real perfect score. That is the victory that matters most. That is the proof that our lives are more connected and more powerful than we ever imagine.